So today I'm making a Belarusian pork stew called Machanka. So to get started, we need 600 grams of pork ribs. Here I've got baby back ribs that I've had my butcher cut lengthwise into small pieces. And I'm going to go ahead and cut those apart into individual ribs. Now in a large pot, I'm going to brown those ribs in a little bit of oil. And once they're brown on all sides, we can add in a beer. I'm using a lager. Any sort of hearty brown beer will work. Next, let's top that off with some water. We want about 1 liter of liquid here. Next, let's go in with a couple bay leaves, 10 or 15 peppercorns, and a few pinches of salt. Bring that to a boil, and we can skim off any of the foam that appears. Cover that up and let it go for 20 minutes. In the meantime, let's make some pancake batter. I'm going to crack 2 eggs into a mixing bowl and beat them thoroughly. Next up, I'll add in a tablespoon of sugar, a few pinches of salt, and here I've got 450 milliliters of warm milk. I'm going to drizzle and whisk that in slowly so that I don't cook the eggs. Next, I'm going to mix in a packet of yeast. And then we can go in with our flour. I've got a cup of flour here. That's about 250 milliliters. Start by mixing that in fully with a fork. And to get rid of any lumps, I'm going to use my stick blender. That should get it nice and smooth. Now we can cover this up with some plastic wrap and let it rise for 10 to 15 minutes. Now that our ribs have been going for 20 minutes, I can go in with 400 grams of pork sausage. I'm going to prick the skin with a knife and dump those guys in. Cover that up and let it go for another 20 minutes until the sausage is cooked. While that's going, we can make our pancakes. So throw some butter into a pan. And you can see that our batter has risen from that yeast. So pour a little into the pan and spread it out, being careful not to burst too many of those bubbles. And if you see some holes forming, feel free to add a little bit more batter just to fill those in. Now you'll know it's ready to flip when it moves freely when you give the pan a jiggle. So flip it over, brown it on the other side, and then we can remove it off to a plate. These pancakes are a little brittle, so they may leave some pieces behind, and that's totally fine. Those will be a little snack for the chef. Now, into a large pan, let's throw 40 grams of butter. And in that butter, we can saute a diced onion. Once those are soft and translucent, we can add 3 cloves of minced garlic. As well as a teaspoon of cumin. Next, we're going to go in with about 2 tablespoons of flour and make sort of a roux. So stir that thoroughly until all the onions are coated in flour, and cook them a little bit until the flour starts turning brown. This will serve as a thickener for the stew without tasting like raw flour. Now let's strain out the broth from the sausage and ribs. And stir that in fairly slowly so that you don't develop any lumps. Bring that up to a boil, and then we can go ahead and add in our sausage cut into bite-sized pieces, as well as our ribs. Give that a stir, cover it up, and let everything come up to the same temperature. And we're ready to serve that up with some sour cream and parsley. Well, I can tell you this is certainly Northern European, that's for sure. The broth has a similar flavor profile to that Polish bigos that I made a little while back, minus the sourness from the sauerkraut. The main things that are jumping out at me are that pork that's in there between the ribs and the sausage. The bay leaf somehow comes through, really creates this sort of background flavor that's just there in every bite. And the cumin, which is not overpowering. I think that half teaspoon was the right amount to use. Otherwise it might start tasting like taco meat. I think the beer lends a little bit of an alcoholic acidity to this in the same way that a wine would, but I think leaving it out would be fine as well. Now you're supposed to dunk these pancakes in here. That really goes well together, actually. The yeast creates this sort of fermented taste that kind of reminds me of injera bread from Ethiopia. Belarusians, are you into Ethiopian food? Because I think you would be with this. That kind of sharpness really balances out how robust this soup is. Strangely enough, buttery bread is balancing out a meaty soup. It makes no sense, but hey, it works. So it's got a lot of steps, but I hope you give it a try and see for yourself how good this is. See you next time. Cheers.